Thank you so much for coming out on this absolutely gorgeous day on a Sunday to have these conversations on some tough topics. We're really grateful that you are here. Let me turn this up. Is that any better? Yeah. Okay. So I am Elizabeth Essink. I live in the Nora area. I attend Faith Church. I got involved in issues at Lakeside Point because I'm in the area. And so I'm a new member to this whole housing issue here in Indiana. And I'm grateful to be learning from a lot of people who've been in this space for a long time. Tyler Brinks is here today as well. He is a fellow at Second Presbyterian. The slides up here. And he and I are going to kind of be facilitating the conversation today. And we're really excited about what we have planned. And I kind of want to give you a vision for where we're headed in the next hour and a half or so you kind of know where we're headed, and then we'll get started. So here's an agenda up on the screen if you want to see that. Evan Bever here from First Baptist is going to get us started and welcome us, and I will formally introduce him in just a moment. Then we are so glad to have Amy Nelson from the Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana to share some information about housing in Indiana that's going to be really key for us to understand and spread to our contacts. And then we are going to spend some time having conversations at our tables around the concept of network mapping. Tyler's going to share a little bit about what that means, how networking has gotten us in part to where we are here today, and then allow you an opportunity at your tables to actually network and continue to build this coalition so that as we head into this next legislative session, we are equipped and ready to really make an impact. So we are so thankful to be here at First Baptist and that they have opened up their space for us. So thank you. Reverend Evan Bever serves here as the senior pastor of First Baptist Church of Indianapolis. In addition to administrative duties, Evan is responsible for worship leadership, pastoral care, Christian education, and mission and outreach. In recent years, the congregation of FBC Indianapolis has grown increasingly diverse, welcoming people who have come as refugees from Southeast Asia and Africa. Evan is a passionate advocate for meaningful inclusion and effective collaboration in diverse communities. Evan is a graduate of Princeton Theological Seminary and studied English literature at Purdue University. He has training in conflict transformation, experiential education, and nonprofit executive leadership, and is an experienced leader in intercultural settings. He has served on the board of directors of the Baptist Student Foundation at Purdue, a campus ministry of the American Baptist Churches USA, and currently serves on the board of directors of the Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana and of Patchwork Indy. Evan and his wife Brianna live in Indianapolis with their son Isaiah. Evan and First Baptist have been doing work in this arena for a really long time, and we're grateful for their extension of hospitality today. Please welcome Evan.
Welcome. It is a privilege to welcome you all here today. Thank you for the warm introduction. Thank you all so much for being here. Housing is an issue that's close to my heart. 6 years ago, I joined the board of the Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana because I wanted to do something, or at least be part of an organization that was doing something about the problems I had seen in our community. In my years of ministry at First Baptist, I had walked alongside so many families, especially those who'd been resettled here as refugees. And I had seen over and over again working families struggling to find housing that was affordable, safe, and comfortable for them and their children. Providing housing is hard. It's complicated, but it shouldn't be as hard to find housing as it is in Indianapolis. Over my years with the Fair Housing Center, in spite of the incredible work that Amy and her staff and many other partners in the community are doing, we've seen the problem get worse instead of better. I know many of you are here because you've seen similar issues in our community, and it makes me angry to know that a community as rich as ours, a city with as many assets as we have, can't provide good, safe housing for all the people who live here. There's no reason for it. And yet, it makes me so happy to see all of you here today to talk about this problem, to make plans and begin to make a change for our community. I know that people working together can actually solve this problem. And my faith teaches me that when we are gathered from diverse traditions, from different denominations, from many different faith backgrounds or no faith background at all, that God is at work, that the spirit of the divine is moving around us, and that incredible, miraculous changes might be right on the horizon. My faith tells me that's true. I struggle to believe it, but on days like today, when we are gathered here together to talk about these issues and make plans, it's a little easier to believe. Thank you for your witness to me, for the testimony of your presence here, for the conversations we will have, and for all your hard work on behalf of our community. Welcome to First Baptist Church.
I now have the opportunity to introduce our primary speaker, Amy Nelson from the Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana. It is our privilege to welcome her back. She spoke at the first summit that we had back in April at Second Presbyterian Church, where she spoke on the rights that tenants in Indiana do and do not have. And so it's a privilege for her to be back here. Amy is the executive director of the Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana, FHCCI. She joined them in October of 2011. The mission of the Fair Housing Center is to ensure equal housing opportunities by eliminating housing discrimination through advocacy, enforcement, education, and outreach. FHCCI has a service area of 24 counties in Central Indiana, reaching a population of over 2.5 million. The Fair Housing Center works to prevent housing discrimination through its advocacy and education in its inclusive communities and its public policy programs. It conducts investigations to uncover violations of fair housing laws and files enforcement actions to stop identified discriminatory practices. And they offer a diverse array of education programs to build a knowledge of fair housing laws, and they work to strengthen the housing policies at the state, local, and federal level. And second has been had the opportunity for the last month or so to house their what is it called? Lending, absolutely. The lending exhibit of discriminatory practices across the city of Indianapolis for many decades. And it's now at Meridian Street United Methodist Church. And so we're happy that it's been shared across the city. Amy also believes that everyone deserves safe, affordable, accessible housing that is free from discrimination. She has managed nonprofit fair housing organizations and programs since 1997, working previously at the Fair Housing of the Dakotas and the Housing Opportunities Made Equal of Virginia. She currently serves on the board of directors for the Central Indiana Realtist Association, the Indiana Coalition for Human Services, and Prosperity Indiana. Please join me in welcoming Amy.
Thank you. All right. Couple items before we get into the material here today is that my board member, Mr. Bever there, made a comment when I walked in. Well, so you're here to give us all the uplifting stuff. And I am unfortunately not going to be that person. My job here today are, especially if you are not a renter in our community, is to tell you what those struggles are. And so that we can have you join us in allyship in trying to fight for change. If you're a renter, none of this is going to be new to you. But if you aren't a renter, this is the information we're trying to get out to the public. And I should mention that, and I was a little late to do it because some of you were already here. At the table up front, I put some copies of our reports Particularly, there's a reddish brown covered one that is going to be what most of my presentation today is about, that talks about, there's a brand new report we just released on Monday, as a matter of fact. So just want to point that out in case you're somebody who still likes paper copies of things, you can grab that there. Of course, all these documents are also on our website. So let me get started here and get us through. Here's my contact information in case anybody has any questions later. This information is also in our reports as well. I always need to preface, nothing I say today is legal advice. I am not an attorney. If you need legal advice about something, please consult an attorney. That is not me. What I have done is, as was mentioned, I've been working in fair housing, since 1997. Lots of opinions on things, but they're just not legal opinions. So I'm going to skip ahead. We always put these slides in just in case we're with a group that we need to get additional information, out about the basics of fair housing laws. But this is what I want to talk about today. And I want to start out with, in January of this year, we released a report on mortgage lending. It's what we call the Blue Report. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that today, but it leads into our rental discussion. Because where are there the barriers to people in becoming homeowners? And what is keeping people potentially in the rental market that should be able to become homeowners if that's what they want to do? What are some of those barriers? And what we're finding is, since we released this report in January, is a lot of people just are unaware of the disparities when it comes to who is and isn't homeowners. So I want to highlight a few of those with you today. So here is a chart, and this is in the Blue Report, of US homeownership rates. So the line that is the blue line is the white homeownership rate, which is about 73%. Based upon the data that we had pulled at the time. For Blacks or African Americans, it is 42%. Huge gap between whites and Blacks when it comes to homeownership rates. Hispanics and Latinos, about 47.5%, a little bit better, but still big gap between whites. Asians, almost 58%, again, a little bit better, but still big gap between whites. And then American Indian, Alaska Native at about 51%. And this chart goes back to about 1994 on there. And you can see that when whites got more homes, so did everybody else. But we've never really closed that gap that has been there. And I'm going to talk about that here when we get into our local data. So here is our local data. If you are not aware of this, so the blue bar is Marion County, the red bar is the state of Indiana, and that tannish bar is US rates. So let's look at that. Home ownership, again, in our county, white home ownership, 65%. We just talked about state level, 74%, a little bit better. And then we just talked about national, 72%. Look at that gap, though, between whites and Blacks. Blacks in our county, 34%. 34%. That's it. 65% for whites, 34% for Blacks. State level, a little bit better, 37%, national level, 42%. Most jarring of gaps that are there is between Blacks and whites. And Hispanics a little bit better, Asians a little bit better, but when we look at the Black home ownership rate versus whites, staggering difference that is there. And how has that rate been? This chart goes back to, this is Marion County, goes back to 1970. In our homeownership rates today are lower for people of color than they were in 1970. We have gained no ground in homeownership for people of color. When we look at this, going back, the Federal Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968, made it unlawful to discriminate rental sales, lending, zoning, insurance transactions. Made that finally unlawful. Up until that point, was legal in our state. To essentially be doing those things. So 1968, no longer can banks deny loans to somebody just because of their race or color as part of that. But what the Fair Housing Act didn't do was correct everything that had happened before that. And that is the history of racial covenants, redlining, blockbusting, neighborhood intimidation, all that had already segregated our neighborhoods and had a few generations where whites were able to obtain mortgages and become homeowners, but people of color and some religious groups were stopped, were blocked from being able to do that. It was not allowed. Those mortgages could not be made. Literally, the appraisal industry had put it into their underwriting. US government had put it into their policies that we will not make loans in Black neighborhoods. We will not make loans. So when we then look at why do we have this gap in our county today, it's because that gap was already there. And we haven't been able to make it up since that time. Because just saying, hey, from here on out, discrimination, you can't do that, that's not enough. So looking at this, the red line is Black or African American in our county. In 1970, the home ownership rate was almost 49%. Today, 34%. Again, we've lost ground on that. Whites is being fairly steady over that time here. That's the grayish silver line, fairly steady. But everybody else, Hispanics, Asians, everybody else has lost in our county, is lower than we were in 1970. So why is that important? Why are we here? Well, it's because there's a lot of people in here who deserve to be homeowners, who could be in a position to be homeowners with the right type of program, but are stuck being renters. And so that's why we have to care about what's happening in the rental industry as well. So what I'm going to spend the rest of my time is talking about the highlights from this report. Again, we just released this on Monday. This talks mostly focuses in on rising rental costs and some other housing burdens is mostly what we were talking about. And then we have some policy recommendations at the end. But let's start off first is who are Marion County, City of Indianapolis renters? Who exactly are they? Well, we just showed you home ownership rate is about 55%. Overall average, it's about 55% in there. So 45% of our county is renters, is made up of renters. Huge chunk of our county are renters as a result. Comprising about 170,000 households. Half of that 45% are white. Disproportionately, the Black population is made up of renters. Why? We just showed you they can't be homeowners. They were shut out of that. Weren't able to become homeowners, couldn't pass down generational wealth to their kids or grandkids because they were shut out of that market up until 1968. So disproportionately, if you look at renters in our county, we're looking at Blacks or African Americans. Hispanics are in there to some degree, Asians are in there to some degree, but in our county, it is predominantly a Black issue. So anytime that rental market is being predatory, it's going to disproportionately impact there. Others, persons with disabilities make up about 13%. That's across racial categories. Children are present in about 27% of renter households. Female-headed households with kids make up about 15%. Working households, well, 64%. If you're a homeowner, you're a renter, 64% of you are working. I think that's a pretty strong statistic there. Both are working. The problem is, hey, the median household income for renters is only $35,000. If you're a homeowner, it's $71,000. Your average income. Renters, $35,000. Remember that because that is going to be used throughout our report. But look at nearly half of the income for renters as part of that. Let's look at cost burden. When we look at is somebody cost burden, paying too much of their income toward rent, we look at that. A good rule is that 30% of their income goes toward housing costs. That's a good, that then leaves funds left over for other necessities, food, transportation, healthcare, whatever it might be. If you go above 30% that you're paying for your housing, then something's got to give. Something else isn't getting paid. as part of that. And for most people, the rent check has to get paid first to keep the roof on their head. So then everything after that then suffers. You don't take prescriptions. You're not buying as many groceries, whatever it might be. That's part of that. Okay. So 30% is what we're looking for. But in 2020, over 50% of Marion County's renter households were cost burdened. 50% of that 170,000 are cost burdened. Nearly 25% of renters are severely cost burdened, meaning that 50% of their income goes toward their rent, goes toward their housing costs. Rent burdened households have increased from 78 to 87% over the past decade. It's getting worse. And I'm going to give you some ideas as to why that's happening. Here's, I didn't highlight this, but incomes at 50,000 have also increased from 66 to 73%. Again, getting worse. More people are becoming cost burdened in what they're paying for their housing. Disproportionately, that falls upon people of color and those with kids. Falls upon Blacks, Hispanics, those with children, those over the age of 65, or those with a disability. Overwhelmingly make up that cost burden group that is there. Since the beginning of the pandemic, rental prices on average have increased $200 to $300 more per month since the start of the pandemic. That's increases of 20 to 30%, just depending upon where you're at. Think about that, $200 to $300 more per month during that time period. Overall, roughly at the start of the pandemic, the average overall rent in the county was $929. It's now $1,126. So that's the overall rent amount. I'm going to show you some breakouts by apartment type here in a bit. A 2-bedroom unit has increased from the start of the pandemic at $976 to $1,222 a month. A 3-bedroom, so if you've got kids in the home, has increased from $1,128 to $1,428. So we've seen these costs increase by 20 to 30%. Wages only 4 to 5%. Been hearing a whole lot about how wages are going up. They're not going up as much as rent is. So people, again, this is why people are becoming more cost burdened, because rent is going up more than their income is in looking at them. Here's gives you an idea of how much rent has gone up by unit type. So studios have the lowest at about 19%, 1 bedrooms about 25%, 2 bedrooms about 25%, 3 bedrooms, if you can find them, are about 26, 27%. That rent has increased within there. Occupancy rates, vacancy rates. So when we look at rental units, we look at what's the vacancy rate, how many units are vacant at any given time. And it is the lowest it has been in 20 years, which makes for a very tight rental market. Vacancy rates are hovering around 6% in our county. That makes it rental units extremely competitive. At any time there is competition, discrimination goes up. Because housing providers, the ones that aren't the good acting, will pick and choose and sometimes use bias as part of that as to who they will or won't rent to as a result. So here you see the red line is vacancy. The red line, I'm sorry, is average rent price. See how it's going up? The blue line is vacancy rates. Lowest it's been in 20 years, around 6%. There's no problem in filling units in our county. If you want to find a different unit, you're going to be hard pressed to find something to move to if you need to. Some other data I want to highlight from this report is that when it comes to remember home ownership, at the same time we've been seeing this, we've had a hot sales market, multiple bids happening on houses. In fact, that green report that I have up there shows FHA lending not being done in our county. So if you need help to become a homeowner by having help with down payment assistance, closing costs, you're not coming in basically all cash or with a conventional, qualifying for a conventional product, you're not becoming a homeowner. And you haven't been since the pandemic started. So that is keeping a lot of people who are at income levels where they could become homeowners not able to get a home. So that's keeping them as renters. And they are taking a lot of those units that might be affordable to people at lower income levels. So let's look at that, what we found there. In 2011, households earning over 75,000 made up 7% of renters. As of 2020, it was up to 15%. They had doubled over that time period. What wasn't, or why is this? And this goes into what's been happening in our sales market. What was affordable to prospective home buyer making 75,000 in 2019 has pushed them out of reach. They can't find a home. And in our Marion County home values have increased by 50%. 2019, a family earning 75,000 searching for a home in the 250 to 350 range. Now that home is now priced 375 to 500. Mortgage interest rates recently here have also been increasing. If you want to become a homeowner now, you're going to be paying for it. Just looking from 1 year ago to today, a $300,000 home, you're going to be paying more than $500 more in mortgage interest than you were a year ago. Again, pricing people out, making them stay renters. You might want to become homeowners, keeping them out of that. Marion County renters with household incomes between 75 and 100,000 pay an average of $987 in monthly rent, far less than the 30% of their income. So they're taking a lot of those affordable units away from people who can't go more expensive in what they need. I am not going to spend a lot of time on this. We have in every report that we have released talked about investor activity in our county, and investors are just doing serious damage here in our county, whether that's in sales or whether that's in rentals. But I want to point out that disproportionately our neighborhoods of color are suffering from the investor activity. Investors, that's the red line, are purchasing more homes in Black neighborhoods than they are in other neighborhoods. They're picking up those affordable homes that were there and taking away then those home ownership opportunities from folks, taking those homes off the market and flipping them over to expensive rentals. They aren't reselling them. They're making them expensive rentals. And so that's a problem there because we're losing home ownership units. Our Blue Report spent a bit of time talking about this in case you want to look at some more. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. We're actually going to try to get a report out maybe by the end of the year on investor activity, looking at it from the rental as well as from the sales side. There was an article last year that cited Indianapolis was #1 in the country of 63 metro areas reviewed for investor-owned single-family homes. #1 in the country. It is not good for us to have Wall Street control our housing market. Not good. These are out-of-state companies. They are not local. And we see that in the news reports every day. All right, let's look at a couple other items here. So half of renters in Marion County earn $35,000 or less. I want to highlight, actually, I skipped over here. Let me highlight the story here. And one of our clients that contacted us, and we have some stories throughout our red report. It's in there. A client contacted us and she was paying monthly rent of $578. She got notice that mid-lease, her landlord was claiming that they had the right to increase rent and it was going to increase to $685 per month. But then they also told her, hey, by the way, when your lease comes up for renewal in February, the rent is going up to $1,325. I wish that was the only story. We heard like that. We've heard story after story after story. So let me highlight this one. FHCCI client rents from an apartment complex informed their rent was increasing by $500. Another client who contacted us was notified their rent was going up by $300. In both situations, they felt they had no choice but to pay it because they couldn't find anywhere else to go. So where's that money going to come from? It's not going to be in them in their, they're going to cut back on prescriptions. They're going to feed their kids instead of themselves. That's where it's going to come from on that. Getting back to for lower income renters, let's look at affordable units. I've been talking overall prices. Let's look at what's out there for affordability in the rental market right now. For those who are lower income renters, there are about 85,000 renter households earning less than 35,000 in our county. 85,000 earning less than 35,000. Fewer than 50,000 multifamily units have an average rent of less than $875 a month, which would be that 30%. For renters earning less than 35,000 represent half of the county's households. Only 35% of rental units are available to them. Make up 50% of the rental market, but there's only 35% of them can get affordable units. So what's going to happen to that other 15% that's there? The impact of this is that a rent-burdened family earning less than $30,000 in income would have only $360 left for everything else. $360 for every other expense they have during them. That's what that means in dollars and cents. Public assistance barriers. Let me start working, doing my time check here, because I always want to make sure I please Bruce in nailing the time correctly that he gave me. So what are some other barriers? Public assistance. If you are on a voucher, you are going to really struggle to find somewhere to live in our county. Nationally, only 1 in 4 eligible households receives a housing choice voucher. Section 8. It's called housing choice voucher, but many of us still know it as a Section 8 voucher. Only 1 in 4 households who meet the qualifications will get a voucher to help them in paying their rent. 1 in 4. Again, what do the rest of them do? You have to figure out how to make it work. The Indianapolis Housing Agency has an average wait of 5 years and has a waiting list at any time about 8,000 families that are on it. The average IHA housing assistance payment is around $660, which means that it covers 70% of somebody's rent. They're responsible for the other 30%. That is viewed as a fair market rent according to the government. The problem with that is that the way that the government determines what's a fair market rent is they look at the last 2 to 3 years of rental costs. So if you've got a hot market or a market that's taking off, it's not going to catch that because it's looking at old data. So it's always falling really far behind. So again, then in trying to go out in the market and realistically find a unit, rent isn't that amount. I just told you rent was $11.26 a month. But yet HUD is saying it's $9.40. That's there. Those with vouchers also seeking housing experience high levels of housing discrimination. We released a report a few years back. We talked about this more in the red report, but we released a report that found that in Marion County, those who are otherwise qualified would have landlord references, can show a history of being good tenants, are denied with a voucher 82% of the time, just because they're paying their rent with a voucher. If it's a white neighborhood, majority white neighborhood, the denial rate is 90%. Just not because they wouldn't be a good renter, not because landlord can still do background checks, can still make sure they're going to be good renters, but otherwise are denied between 82 and 90%. So there's a struggle out there. So even if you do get a voucher, you might not be able to find anywhere to live with it because of what that cost is. And then secondly, you're going to be on the phone making dozens of calls to find anywhere that's going to take you. And then add in, you've got kids and you've got more discrimination that's happening as well. We talked about one of our client stories that references that. Tenant screening barriers. You've been hearing about evictions. Those of you who have been coming through this series, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on evictions because you all have been hearing about that. We've had an eviction problem for a long time. That problem continues. Indianapolis, 14th highest in the country for our filing rate, 2nd highest in the nation, only behind New York City in the number of evictions that are filed every year. The evictions never really stopped during the pandemic. Outside of a very short window from about March to early September, when the state moratorium was in place, that was the only time evictions really slowed. After that, evictions have been happening throughout the pandemic. And people then will carry that with them. There was a number of landlords in our community who refused to participate in rental assistance programs. The result was that somebody got served the eviction when they could have gotten their rent paid up. This was before rent was able to go to tenants. And now everywhere they go, because of background checks that are done, they're going to get flagged as having the eviction filing on the record, whether justified or not. And that's going to lock them out from other housing opportunities. And that's because of how tenant screening companies collect their data and use it. And they aren't always accurate in their data reporting. Plus, you add in criminal history. If you've got criminal history barriers, we spend some time in the report talking about that. Discrimination. We also look at the report, some of the highest evicting companies in properties and who are increasing rents between 30 to 50%. At the time that they're evicting everybody out. Purposeful. Evicting out the ones with the low, who are paying the low rents to get somebody in who's paying higher rent. On doing that. Profits. I'm gonna, before I lead into the legislative part of this, I'm gonna talk about this. Housing providers are doing very well. And particularly the out-of-state investors who really only care about quick profits, not the local landlord who sees this as a long-term investment, will increase rents fairly modestly over time, keep that property up. These Wall Street investors, they want quick profit. They're not going to invest a lot in these properties. They just want to be making money off of them as quickly as they can. And that leads into substandard housing conditions. Nearly 3/4 of multifamily real estate transactions in our county have been made by out-of-state buyers. The property buying, whether it is single family or multifamily, has not been being done by locals. It has been out-of-state companies coming in and buying up our property. We highlighted in the report a number of these companies. NITYA revenues have increased 214% since 2019. In the properties here locally, rents have increased by 20% or more, depending upon the property. The Zidane have seen their revenues go up 174% since 2019. Their properties rents have increased from 21 to 35%. Pepper Pike have seen their properties here locally have increased rent by 30%. On the single family side, Tricon, Vinebrook, others have seen their profits increase by 200% in recent years. And Starwood, which has bought some properties here in town, their CEO earlier this year, in a call with shareholders, I just told you, they care about his quick profit. They're not here in our city except to own our properties, called a 20% rise in rental costs. And that means by rent going up, not what they were paying to keep properties up. 20% rise in rental costs, a very healthy market, and the effect of inflation, affordable costs, quote, an extraordinary gift that keeps on giving, end quote, to firms like his. Tenants, he said, seem capable and willing to pay these rent increases. Needed changes. In my wrap-up time here, we are one of the few states in the country that does not allow for rent withholding and does not allow for the ability to deduct repairs. The back of our report, we talk about this in more depth than I am right now. Let's look at taxing these out-of-state investors higher. They're not going to be here locally. They're not invested in us. So let's tax them more. Allow for rental registries, which have enforcement mechanisms for those who do not comply. Allow for effective rental inspection programs to ensure safe and habitable housing. Allow for reasonable rent increases, but not price gouging. have adequate oversight of tenant screening companies for data accuracy. Pass a Philadelphia type ordinance, which is City of Philadelphia passed an ordinance last year that banned the we buy homes for cash or those investors from targeting particularly neighborhoods of color and basically harassing them. Basically put a do not call type list as relates to these type of companies. And they also required a certain type of registry for these companies to have local contact as well. Rescind SCA 148, which essentially was Governor Holcomb even thought that bill was so bad because it preempted local housing code. And Governor Holcomb vetoed it, and the veto was overridden last year. So we've got a rescind 148. We've got a rescind SCA 550, which bans the ability of cities to put mandates on affordable housing development. It also bans any form of any attempt by a city to put in reasonable rent increases to block price gouging. And then rescind HEA 1300, which banned the ability of cities to be able to protect voucher holders from discrimination if they otherwise qualify for their housing units that were there. So I think I am about right on time, Bruce, wherever you are. Bruce might have disappeared. So other resources, and I'll open it up to some questions here if we want to do that now, Elizabeth. But on our reports page, you go to fhcci.org. Go to our reports page. All these reports are here as well as another report that we have. You can download those. If you didn't get a copy, looks like there might be some copies still up there. I can't really see. There's one copy left of something that's up there on there, but you can download the full reports that are there. We have lots of videos. We have, as was mentioned, we also have an interactive exhibit on sales and lending discrimination that is based on Indianapolis that analyzes racial covenants in our city, blockbusting, that neighborhood intimidation. It's at Meridian Street United Methodist in their Welcome Center on the second floor. You can see it from 9 to 3, I think Monday through Friday. Please go take a look at it. It's like 12 panels. That really gives you this background, take people with you so they understand why just passing a fair housing law in 1968 wasn't enough because of what had happened in our city prior to that date. We have a number of lending videos that you can take a look at. These are short 5 to 8 minute videos to educate just about issues. We have a very active website. We have publications and posters. All of that. We also have an events page. Follow us on social media. Whatever you might need, we're here as a resource for you in the community. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Elizabeth. And while she's walking up, are there any immediate questions that I might be able to answer? Yes, ma'am. She asked, for those who might be at home, once you get Section 8, is that a lifetime thing? No, you have to recertify each year. So if your income changes, for instance, you get promotions at work, you're able to change jobs. Section 8 is basically a way to get out of it. Is essentially, it is not lifetime. Again, you have to recertify each year to see if you qualify. Do you have to work? No, you don't have to be employed. For instance, in our, I'm trying to remember which report it's in. Blanking right now. In our county, individuals who are working make up about, I think it's like 65% that they're either working or have some form of employment coming in. They just don't make enough to pay for their bills. The individuals that typically are not working are individuals with disabilities or those over the age of 65 are typically the ones that makes up in our county, at least the data in our county. That's who those are. Yes, sir.
How do we get landlords pay their fair share of property tax? The school board asking for raises in building schools and all that, and all of the raises, heights and
So he asked, how do we get landlords to pay their fair share of property taxes when we're also seeing school boards needing, more funds? Now, remember here in Indiana, property taxes do not cover our schools. So it's out of the state fund. So just remember that what schools get is not tied to what somebody's paying in property taxes here locally. So how do we get, well, I just mentioned, let's pass something to tax, especially these out-of-state ones more. I mean, if they're not going to invest in our city, except to profit off of us, let's tax them more. That would have to be state level. That would have to be state. The city might not necessarily be able to do that because of how taxes are, property taxes here in our state. So it would have to be something that we demand of the General Assembly for part of that. Anything else? Yes, sir. So we asked. Yep.
Not only for Marion County, but I believe that Marion County thrives, the whole state thrives. But when you have people who live in rural counties who's trying to control what happens in Marion County, I think that's part of our problem.
I would love it, sir, if you just came up here and just took over the rest of my presentation. So I couldn't have said it, any better. Of course, we want everybody to succeed and prosper in the state of Indiana. But there is, unfortunately, this is Amy talking only. Unfortunately, there appears to be a bias within our state General Assembly against the city of Indianapolis. And we've seen that with bill after bill that targets Indianapolis. And that, needs to change. We need to make sure we know who we are voting for by asking them questions about what their stance are on certain issues, to seeing how they voted on previous bills. Something I forgot to, mention is that we have a tremendous surplus in the state. We do have funds to do things different. It's just, we have chosen not to do that.
Thank you.
I'll be here sitting over there in case anything comes up later.
Briefly do a recap from the last summit that we had at the MTI School of Knowledge on the west side of the state. Is this better? That event focused on evictions and court watching. And we want to acknowledge the quote unquote church ladies, Fran quickly referenced, from Meridian Street Methodist Church, and just reintroduce the eviction court watching toolkit that they offered. The church ladies, they had read in 2020-21 Eviction or Evicted, Poverty and Profit in the American City, Matthew Desmond's acclaimed book and study. And so they tracked down Indianapolis's own resident expert on evictions, Fran Quigley, clinical professor of law at McKinney School of Law in Indianapolis. And he presented to them the idea and practice of court watching, which is a simple two-step process that often meaningfully introduce or influences the way that judges rule. And it's attending a court session when eviction is being heard, typically in a small claims court. And two, it is merely taking notes and observing what happens in that court proceeding. Eviction cases are public hearings, and the sense of accountability that a court watcher's presence brings often eases the judge's sentence. A judge may not necessarily cancel an eviction. That may not be within their power. But Fran says that they often will delay the date by which a family or a person needs to vacate their apartment, often from in a punitive sense, just 1 week's time to get all of your things out. And often the court watcher's presence can delay that 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, So a really meaningful thing for a family to be able to transition to find new homes. So part of the encouragement is to find where your neighborhood small claims court is, and attend an eviction hearing. So if you're in Washington Township, where we are right now, you could go to 53rd Street and Keystone. And there's a Chase Bank, there's a little suite, and small claims court is right next to the Planet Fitness of all places. So it's close by, it's sort of an unassuming building, but meaningful things happen to families, and we can make substantive and meaningful change on families' lives by just going, court watching, observing, taking notes. These church ladies, Fran, and then the team at Prosperity Indiana and the Housing for Hoosiers team, Andrew Bradley, who presented on that back in August. They put together the Eviction Watch Court Toolkit, which is here. And so you can access that with the QR code, with the website, going to housingforhoosiers.org and searching for the toolkit there. As we transition from court watching as a short-term solution and assistance responding to the housing needs within our city and state, we also look ahead, not to be overwhelmed by Amy's presentation. Vital information that we learn indeed can be overwhelming and worrisome that we play just a small part, but our networks have already made meaningful change within some local policies, and just again, we can affect people's lives, and we have thus far. So we'll get into that, and we just want to map that out as we build momentum towards our third and final fall housing summit on legislative policy and legislative change and coalition building, which is what we're doing now and what we hope to continue to do. So this morning at Second Presbyterian Church, where I work and worship, we had the pleasure to host Pastor Eugene Cho, who longtime pastor from Seattle, out of Seattle, and now is the president for Bread for the World, a Christian-based organization, a hunger nonprofit focused on committing to changing housing or to policies for hunger and ending hunger locally, domestically, and also globally. And he preached today, and his mission or his message was titled "On Mission Together." And he said we need a spirit of collaboration to do, in this case, God's mission for justice, for compassion, for doing God's work. And he made a point to say in his sermon, this is not a message titled "On Mission Alone." So it's on mission together, not alone. We are on this mission here to address housing in our state together. And so with this spirit of collaboration in mind, we come to the idea of network mapping, figuring out what it is. It's basic and at some level. It's asking who are our mutual friends, who shares an interest, and who is impacted on the same issues that we care about, that we have come either personally, immediately, or through relationship to be affected by. And in this case, obviously housing in the state of Indiana. So network mapping is about examining and investigating those questions. Who cares about this issue? Who's affected by the same issue? And who's already working on this issue? And so by mapping our networks and exploring who our mutual friends are, we can clarify partnerships. We can determine next steps for collaborative activities, and we can identify opportunities as we try to impact the system for housing and to make a greater impact on the system as it stands today. It's not uncommon for organizations, for churches to work simultaneously, but separately and independently on the same issue. And as a result, we remain siloed, not necessarily intentionally, not as we hoped, but because we haven't connected with one another to collaborate with that spirit of collaboration. And those networks are possible, and I think they're powerful, and they're just laying just a little bit beneath the surface, and we're trying to tap into that today. Cultural analyst and social impact consultant David John Steele He says many churches, nonprofits, and corporations have latent networks of members, employees, customers, alumni, and suppliers. Few of these latent networks are mobilized to be effective in furthering their influence and mission. And so our question is, what if? What if we knew who was working for the same things we are? And what if we could mobilize to greater effect? And so if we can get closer to uncovering these latent networks, to knowing who our allies are, who our partners are, who our mutual friends are, and then we can form new partnerships, that we can make greater strides towards impact. So as we move again ahead towards the third summit, which will be October 23rd, we're hoping to build a deeper network and richer connections and build stronger coalitions for housing change in the state. And I also want to note that we have networked in meaningful ways so far. They've just, in some cases, been a little bit more haphazard. We've been, gifted by sort of serendipitous moments. Certainly some people of faith would say these are divine connections that have come into place, that have put these people together, us in the same room, those online, those who can't be here, but care deeply. We brought us together to make change. And so I sort of want to point out just some of those connections we have thus far. And I don't want to point out Claire Holba, but she has a pretty profound story of sort of circuitous path that's brought her into this web concern for housing, namely the residents at Lakeside Point just up the street. And so that's certainly Claire can explore that story in a more complete way, but just to sort of highlight just sort of how these things have moved. And then, one personal example, then one sort of collective example of what we've done over the last year, many years, decade even, for First Baptist and for some local residents. And so Claire grew up in Indiana, as far as I'm aware. She played basketball at IUPUI and at Marion. She studied accounting and she studied languages, Chinese and Japanese languages. And she gained international business experience and she built a network abroad. And then she traveled to Thailand. And there in Thailand, she taught at a refugee camp with survivors who had experienced conflict in Burma, and also known as Myanmar. And as a relationship with the Burmese refugees grew, she learned that some in that camp, again, in Thailand, had relatives, had friends who lived in all places in Indiana and in the state or in the city of Indianapolis, and of all places at the Lakeside Point Apartments in Nora. So she went literally across the world to find people who were home in her backyard, where she went, what she said, formative years. And that brought her back to this city to care for people she had met, she had loved, she had cared for, who had shown her hospitality and care in Thailand, came back here and reconnected with relatives, Burmese refugees who were seeking a place of welcome and hospitality. And we're in some ways finding it, but in many ways we're not finding it at the Lakeside Point Apartments in Nora. And so that brought her into this work in a connected way with the formation of Patchwork Indie, relationship with Bruce Garrison, the team there, and then partnerships that form from there, right? First Baptist has cared for refugee communities for the last 8, 10 or so years. And so it's that partnership with Faith Church, again, immediately across the street from Lakeside Point, just, a 2-minute walk from here, right? It's up the street. And so those relationships were formed. It's the Hebrew prophet Amos and the 20th century prophet and preacher, reformer, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who talk about justice rolling down like water and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. And I think this coalition for tenant protections has seen justice roll down like water in a steady stream over the last months and years. And I think, especially even in recent weeks, justice has been done. And so we're going to continue that work. But it's the coalition and the network that has seen this stream flow steady in the right direction. There's local churches, right, like First Baptist, like Faith, and its neighbors across the street at Lakeside Point, who united in this work for years, really, for years. This hasn't been a short-term thing, right? Years long, to advocate for safer living conditions for those residents. There's a young reporter who was at the April summit. You recognize her name, Colin Chang of the Indy Star. She went to Yale. I don't believe she's from Indiana. She moved here for work, and she has reported on story after story after story on the state of housing in our city and our state. Other congregations have heard the stream flowing, right? Second Pres. I've only been at Second for about a year, and within, I think, the second or third day at work, our head pastor, Chris Henry, mentioned the situation at Lakeside Point. He and his wife had driven through the complex, had seen the leasing office, the main office, still burned down from 2 months before. It stayed that way, burned, just dilapidated as it was for the next 7 or 8 months until the city had to step in to say, we need to remove this. It's unsafe. This is wrong. I was aware of this within the first few days, and so I was, brought into the fold early, but only for the last year, right? St. Luke's Methodist has been partner, King of Glory Lutheran Church in Farmville. The stream has kept flowing. It's church ladies from Meridian Street, UMC, going to eviction court, because of a book study, right? Because of a book study, because of their faith convictions, and they got involved in this work. Months of meetings on Zoom, elsewhere, summits for the last 6 months. We've moved closer to a confluence of change. It helps when big corporations are affected, to be frank, right? Citizens Energy was owed $1.9 million from the former owners of Lakeside Point, JPC, Affordable Housing Foundation. They owed, $1.9 million to Citizens Energy across 4 different properties. And Citizens was threatening to shut off water and natural gas for over 1,100 residents. And of course, that's wrong. And so, it's our network here that raised the voice. It's Colin's reporting, it's WTHR's reporting. It's the city of Indianapolis and Mayor Hogshead who said, this isn't right. The Attorney General stepped in. And so there was a consolidated effort, the spirit of collaboration between the Office of the Attorney General, the city of Indianapolis, and Citizens Energy that said, we've got to get these folks out. Again, they've been a problem for a decade and longer. And now there's this, community organizer Michael Geekin says that power is really consolidated into 2 basic forms, and it's organized people and organized money. And we have had the organized people power for years now. We've been building that. And then, of course, organized money, like $1.9 million for an energy company, is pretty meaningful loss. So it's that organized people and money that brought things together. And as of the last 10 days, last week, JPC affordable housing is banned from the state of Indiana for the next 7 years. That's important. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. That was a coordinated effort. That was a spirit of collaboration. That's a meaningful change that's happened. I think indeed the confluence of a steady rolling stream that's fed into waters of justice. And we're looking to continue that momentum, to continue that work in a really strong way. And so that's why we're here, to try to continue to map this network, to form a coordinated effort within the spirit of collaboration today. And so I'm going to pass that. Actually, I want to say one more thing about the stakeholders we have in our work. And of course, Elizabeth will point you in just a moment to the different ways we can collaborate and network within our tables and have ideas for people outside of this room. But it's worth saying that within the last week, the city or the Indianapolis Public School District has introduced the Rebuilding Stronger redistricting plan that will move, that will create 4 different quadrants for schools. Some schools are closing for resource reasons, but they're gonna, they're wanting to maintain greater continuity for students. The public school district and the second largest district in the state and the biggest city in the state has recognized and incorporated the reality for their families of housing instability and transience into their new plan, Rebuilding Stronger. Students in neighborhood schools, in district transfers in IPS, 76% of those in-district transfers are because families have had to move into new housing. And so students' education development and formation has been, is affected because they change schools 2, 3, 4 times within just, a few years' time. And so if you're a family and you move within your quadrant in the new proposed plan, you will not have to change schools. You will continue with the continuity of education and care from teachers, and you will still receive busing and all the sort of rights offered to students. It's profound to say that again, IPS as a district has recognized the reality of housing instability for families and has accounted for that in their work. So if you are in education, as we'll talk about the stakeholders across this work, if you're in education, you have a tangential, adjacent relationship to this work. And so we're going to try to uncover all the other relationships, direct, indirect, about how we can connect our network in the spirit of collaboration and really unearth these latent networks for more effective. Thanks.
So we want to give you in the remaining time that we've got the opportunity to do just that, to kind of network and continue that process. We realize that for many of us who have gotten involved because of Lakeside Point, this is one instance of a systemic problem that's been going on way before Lakeside Point. It's one instance of that. And so as we want to join that stream to continue to help affect change, we realize all of the organizations and the stakeholders that are involved in that process. And so we're going to give hopefully about 10 minutes for you to talk at your tables. If you're not at a table with other people, please join a table. If you're at a table with people that you already know, please join a different table. Talking to people you don't know and sitting at a table with people you don't know is awkward, but we're going to get comfortable with being awkward. And we want to do 2 things. We want to connect and explore the social realms that you are in. Work, where you volunteer, if you worship somewhere. Where's life taking you? What are you passionate about? What are you involved in? And see if you have connecting points with the people at your table. Learn about how they have been impacted or not been impacted. If this is a new thing to you, then you're there to share where you're coming from and to get to know the people at your table. Then we want you to kind of start to think through who are other stakeholders in this issue that we could either directly invite because you know someone, or who you can let us as facilitators know about so that we can help facilitate those connections. As we've been sitting in this in preparation for today, I realized how many other networks I wouldn't have thought of that I do have access to, that I could begin to ask questions and get information and get curious. And in those conversations, get them to join in so that they're informed and they know what's going on. Because if you're not impacted, you may not know, but we're all going to be increasingly impacted. So those are the 2 questions. If you need anything from me, holler. I'll call time here in about 8 minutes or so. But join a table if you're not already at one with people you don't know, and start to kind of think through. There are sheets at your table that have stakeholder categories if you kind of need your memory or your thought jog on what a stakeholder category could be that could be connected to this. If you take notes, that's great. We would love to see what you see or think of, and go for it.
Those of you on the Zoom call, we can make our own discussion group if you would like.
Elizabeth is.
I'm allowing, yes, I'm turning on the volume. This is Debbie and I'm turning on the volume. So if this, if anybody from the chat group wants to share some items, we thought it might be a little wily to just leave you all alone in the chat group to do this, but we'll try it this way. If it works, it works. If not, I'll mute it and you guys can chat within yourselves. So.
Well, this is Jim Spahalski from NESCO. One thought that I had was some possible legislation that an investor landlord cannot collect rents on a property unless his property taxes are up to date.
Okay. That's a great idea. And not just in the problem solving area, but just sort of sharing Jim, tell us a little bit about what NESCO is.
NESCO is the Near East Side Community Organization. We are a conglomeration of, I think it's now 23 neighborhoods on the Near East Side. And we are low income and we have these very conditions that were spoken of today, in that outside investors are moving in, buying up a lot of properties in our different neighborhoods and making it very difficult for renters to find affordable housing.
Okay. Jim, I think one of your members is here today too. There's a gentleman I met walking in and he's on the Near East Side group too. So that's exciting. I'm blanking his name.
Chris Staub, Jim Bowden.
Okay, I'll find out afterwards,
Okay.
but I'll let you know. And what's your last name? Spike.
I'll put you should have my email. I'll put it in the contacts or in the chat.
Great. Yes, okay, that's great. Thank you. All right. Anybody else from the Zoom group want to share your connections with this issue?
This is Jeanette Smith. I have several different, I worship at Allisonville Christian Church. We are active with the Family Promise organization and currently sponsoring their apartment program. I don't think that's the official name, but so there are a number of people in the congregation that are very interested in the area and at least some awareness. I'm also a big volunteer with Habitat for Humanity, which obviously is working directly on helping people who can't afford a traditional mortgage to become homeowners. And then thirdly, I'm involved with the So Indie Quality of Life Plan and sit in on the Send Housing Committee meetings, which is another organization that is very active, working, trying to help provide affordable housing, both rentals and homes for purchase.
Great, thank you, Jeanette. Is Alex Slabowski Family Promise? I get some of the titles mixed up. Oh, well.
I
Anyway.
don't believe so. I think
Okay.
Mike Chaperon is the executive director of Family Promise. He might be on staff with him, but he's not the executive director. I don't know everybody at Family Promise.
Okay, I
Mike
sometimes get Alex's group and Andrew Bradley's group mixed up. And anyway, okay. If you want to
Okay.
put any of those organizations in the chat, I'll save the chat and then kind of connect it that way. That would be great.
Okay.
How about some of the real-time people? Any of you guys want to share?
Just sharing in what we're involved in.
Yeah, like what are your,
Sorry. Yeah, so hi, I'm Morgan Miller. I am a school psychologist for Indianapolis Public Schools. And I also worship at Second Presbyterian Church. Those are areas where I'm most directly involved. I've only been in Indianapolis for about a year. So in terms of volunteer or being more involved in the community, I'm still kind of working on that. But those are kind of the two organizations that I would say I spend most of my time with.
And what's your last name?
Miller.
Miller. Okay, I thought you said Meyer and I'm like, wait, it's Miller. Okay,
Yeah.
great. All right, thank you. Suzette, did you want to share? No. Okay, Suzette's here to listen and Reverend Beth, are you interested?
Hello. So I'm Reverend Beth Douglas, one of the pastors at Second Presbyterian Church. Also only been in Indianapolis for about a year, but just so grateful for Tyler and Lisa Enright and so many people in our Second Church community, and just here today to learn more and to figure out how we can get involved. Done some of the work that Second Church does on rental utilities assistance, and just, overwhelmed by the realities of what people are facing. And I know there's, a small part that I can play, and really looking forward to learning more from the work that you all are doing and learning more through this event. So
Great. Awesome. Cool. Thank you. And anybody else in the Zoom chat? Does anybody else want to share?
Well, I will share a second item then, and that is that also in regard to tenants, it has been more than one occasion that I have looked at a tax surplus property house that is on the market to be sold, that is occupied by a tenant. And that's why I had the suggestion earlier in regard to landlords not being able to collect rent unless their property taxes are current. For any properties that are tax delinquent, I would like to see also a legislative effort to try and get the tenant to have the right to bring the property taxes current, or make arrangements to bring the property taxes current in exchange for the home they have been living in, usually for more than 2 or 3 years.
Okay, great. Those are some great ideas. And our next event is October 23rd, and we're going to be looking at policies. Fatty Fedora is sharing some policies that he's bringing. And those are some great ideas, and that would be awesome. Anybody else from the Zoom want to share their connections or kind of networks that you have?
Debbie.
Yes. Oh, hi, Carolyn.
Hi. It's good to hear everyone's voices and to hear all the suggestions. I really think maybe a key connection for the entire city of Indianapolis should be the CDCs, which are the community development
Corporations.
Yes.
What's that?
Community development corporations.
Corporations, because they really know what's going on in their neighborhoods, and they know who's being affected by the laws, who's being evicted, why they're being evicted. I mean, they just have a really tight handle on their community, so to speak. And I think when we talk about network mapping, that CDCs should be incorporated within, or could be one key link to really our entire Marion County.
Okay, that's great. I know there was a CDC that tried to make a purchase on Lakeside Point at one point, and the guy, wasn't interested, but that's a great connecting point for networking.
Hey Debbie, I'll jump in.
Michelle.
Yes. Hi, I'm Michelle Shelburne. I work for HVAF, Helping Veterans and Families, on the Rapid Rehousing team, and I help to house veterans. And I also
hate to disrupt the excellent conversations going on at your tables. But if I can have your attention for just a couple minutes, we want to respect your time here today and at least officially wrap up in the next few minutes, but would love for the conversations to continue. So please feel free to do that after we convene. One other question that we want you to kind of ponder, if not here today, in the coming days and leading up to the October 23rd coalition building event is, can you or have you identified 3 individuals, either part of the stakeholders that you're talking about or people in your sphere that you can think of that you can initiate a conversation with on this topic and that you can invite to that summit on the 23rd. We are still working on the location for where that summit is. So please make sure that we have your contact information. One way that you can do that is Prosperity Indiana and the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition has put together a Google form for either you to drop your contact information if you want to be made aware of events and things that they have going on these issues, or if you have people that you can think of that you would like to get engaged on this topic, you can submit, make sure that they would be okay with this. You can submit their contact information so that they get those updates, or you're welcome to, there is a link on the notes pages that are on your tables for the presentation today. So if you want to have these slides, there's a bit.ly, so it's a short link on the page on your table that has a spot for you to take notes. On that page that has a spot for you to take notes are also places for you to kind of think through the different kinds of stakeholders and people that you might know that you could contact and invite them to the event. So if you need that QR code, you can take a picture of it now, or it is in that slideshow, and let us know either those people, have them fill it out so that we can continue to build this coalition and continue to share information among ourselves as we head into this next legislative session, which could be really important. And then Tyler was going to wrap us up with just a couple of other words. And then please do feel free to continue to converse. At some point here, we're going to need to make sure that we scoot so First Baptist can wrap up and clean up. But we're really, really grateful that you're here and grateful for the connections that you're building.
As Elizabeth said, Sunday, October 23, 2:30, that location to be determined is our final housing summit of this fall. The hope and expectation is that it will likely be at either Second Presbyterian Church, which hosted the April summit, but also perhaps at Faith Church on 91st Street in College, across the street from Lakeside Point, which we think would also serve some wonderful poetic justice as we work from their work in collaboration in the tenants at Lakeside Point as a focus of our work. So for that event, we'll keep you posted indeed, and we'll hear in October from Andrew Bradley, who works at Prosperity Indiana. He's the director of policy, and he also works for the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition, who put together the Fort Watchers Toolkit, and he's presented at the last 2 events as well. So he'll work as we continue to consolidate our coalitions and build and expect that work in the future. And then we're also anticipating that State Senator Fatty Kadura, who represents this very district, the state's 30th district, Washington Township and other local communities. He'll be an attendant at that meeting or at that summit. He'll be presenting and looking ahead to this next legislative period, which I hadn't known until Amy pointed out that it sounds like it may be the housing session for the state, and this will be potentially a really meaningful time for legislative change in the state of Indiana. So as we leave, our encouragement to you is to bring and refer a friend to this next summit. Continue to fill out that, both fill this form, but also fill out your network, piece this stuff together, invite your